The transmission arrived during the evening meal, and it changed everything. Rivi was picking at her food when her personal communicator lit up with an emergency signal. She was a junior diplomat of the Solari people, a bird-like species known throughout the galaxy for their gentle nature and skill with words. Fighting was not in their blood. Running was. Hiding was. Survival through peace was the Solari way. She opened the message and heard screaming. The recording came from a mining colony 3 systems away. The video was broken and filled with static, but she could see enough. Shadows moved through the streets of the colony. People ran. People fell. The shadows caught them and pulled them into something worse than darkness. Then the transmission ended. Rivi sat frozen in the diplomatic station's dining hall. Around her, representatives from 12 different species continued their meals and conversations. Nobody else had received the message. It had come through old channels, emergency frequencies that most people had forgotten existed. She brought the recording to the council the next morning. Counselor Haroon, the senior Solari elder on the station, watched it with narrow eyes. Other council members gathered around the display. When the recording finished, silence filled the room. The pale tide. Someone whispered. Rivi had heard the stories. Every species had. The pale tide was a hive mind that had terrorized the galaxy 300 years ago. They consumed everything. Not just resources or territory, but life itself. They absorbed living beings into their collective mass. Entire civilizations had vanished before the tide suddenly went dormant. Most believed they were gone forever. Some said they were just a myth, exaggerated by frightened ancestors. This recording proves nothing, Counselor Haroon said. It could be pirates, raiders, a local conflict. That was not a local conflict, Rivi replied. Those were pale tide vessels in the background. I compared them to historical records. Historical records from 3 centuries ago. Another counselor said, "This is panic over shadows." The debate continued for an hour. In the end, the council decided to send a survey team to investigate. They scheduled the mission for the following month. Rivi wanted to scream at them. She left the council chamber feeling sick. The station, Horizon 7, suddenly felt smaller. It was a neutral ground for diplomacy, floating in the space between empires. No weapons of war were allowed. No military fleets. Just words and agreements and the belief that civilization could solve all problems. That belief felt very fragile now. She found the humans in the observation deck. There were 12 of them on the station, a small security detail assigned to protect their diplomatic team. Humanity was new to the galactic community, only 50 years since first contact. Most species still viewed them with suspicion. They came from Earth, a world so dangerous that it earned the classification of a death world. Extreme gravity, toxic atmosphere, predators everywhere. The fact that intelligent life had evolved there at all seemed like a cosmic mistake. Sergeant Daniel Webb stood by the window, watching the stars. He was a medium-sized human with short dark hair and eyes that never seemed to rest. Even when standing still, he looked ready to move. "You watched the council session," Rivi said. It was not a question. The humans always watched. "We did," Daniel replied. "You said nothing. Your council does not listen to deathworlders." He turned to face her. "We learned that lesson early." Rivi stepped closer. "You know something. I can see it." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out a small device and projected an image into the air between them. It showed a map of the sector with a red line tracing a path through multiple systems. "Human intelligence has been tracking movement in the outer regions for 2 months," he said. "We tried to warn the council through official channels. They ignored us." "Movement. The pale tide." Daniel's voice was flat. "They are real. They are awake. And this station lies directly in their projected path." Rivi felt her feathers rise in fear. "How long?" "Days. Maybe a week if we are lucky. Then we must evacuate. We must warn everyone." Daniel shook his head slowly. "We tried. Your council dismissed our intelligence as human paranoia. They think we see enemies everywhere because we come from a violent world." Rivi looked at the map. The red line passed directly through Horizon 7's location. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because you believed the recording when others did not. Because you pushed for action." Daniel met her eyes. "And because when the tide arrives, the people on this station will need someone they trust to help them survive. I am just a junior diplomat. I have no authority. Authority will not matter when the screaming starts." Daniel looked back at the stars. My people have a saying. We remember what extinction looks like. We almost faced it ourselves many times. When you have looked into that darkness, you never forget it. Rivi wanted to argue. She wanted to say that the council would listen eventually, that civilization would find a solution. But the words would not come, because deep down, she knew he was right. That night, she could not sleep. She stood at her window and watched the distant stars. They looked peaceful, eternal, unchanging. Then she noticed something strange. Some of the stars were going dark. One by one, points of light vanished from the sky. Her communicator buzzed with a station-wide alert. Unidentified vessels detected at the edge of the system. All personnel report to emergency stations. Rivi pressed her hand against the cold glass of the window and watched the darkness grow. Something massive was approaching. Something that swallowed the light itself. The pale tide had arrived, and the council's month-long investigation had just become meaningless. Nobody had ever seen anything like the pale tide fleet. Rivi stood in the main observation room with dozens of other diplomats and staff. The external cameras showed the approaching vessels, and the room had fallen completely silent. Even the most confident council members had nothing to say. The ships were not metal. They were organic, living masses of pale flesh and bone that moved through space like enormous sea creatures. Thousands of them, drifting toward the station in a formation that blocked out entire sections of the star field. They did not look like they were built. They looked like they had grown. How many? Someone whispered. Sensors count over 4,000 vessels, a technician replied. More arriving every minute. Counselor Haroon stood near the front, his feathers flat against his body. The dismissive elder who had mocked the warnings now looked like a small and frightened bird. We must evacuate, he said. Immediately. There are not enough ships, a station officer replied. We have transport capacity for maybe 300 people. There are over 2,000 on this station. The chaos began then. Delegates pushed toward the exits, shouting demands. Species that had been allies moments ago now fought for priority. The careful piece of horizon, 7 dissolved in seconds. Rivi felt someone grab her arm and pull her away from the crowd. It was Daniel. Come with me, he said. The central hub. My team is setting up a defensive position. Defensive position? Rivi shook her head. Against that. Against whatever comes through the doors. She followed him through corridors that were already filling with running people. Some carried belongings. Some carried children. A Drenari warrior, one of the large reptilian species known for their strength, shoved past them without looking back. They reached the central hub, a large circular room where several main corridors met. The 12 humans were already there, moving equipment and setting up barricades. Amy Price, the team's medic, was helping a group of alien civilians find shelter behind the defensive line. She was a small woman with red hair and a face full of freckles. She looked like she should be teaching children, not preparing for war. But her hands moved with practiced speed as she checked weapons and medical supplies. Sergeant, Amy called out. We have incoming reports. Boarding pods are detaching from the main fleet. Daniel nodded. How long? Minutes. Rivi felt her heart beating too fast. This is insane. You cannot fight them. You should escape while you can. Daniel continued checking his weapon. There are still people trying to reach the evacuation ships. If the tide reaches the transport bay before everyone boards, nobody escapes. So you will die here? For strangers? We will hold here. For as long as we can. He looked at her with those calm, steady eyes. That is what we do. A terrible sound echoed through the station. Metal tearing. The first boarding pods had breached the outer hull. Rivi had never heard screaming like what followed. The pale tide creatures came through the corridors like a flood. They were not one thing. They were many things, combined and twisted together. Limbs from different species. Eyes that did not belong on the same face. They moved in ways that hurt to watch, too fast and too wrong. The humans opened fire. Energy weapons lit up the corridor with bright flashes. Some creatures fell. Others simply absorbed the blasts and kept coming. They are adapting, Amy shouted. Switching to kinetic. The humans pulled out different weapons. Older weapons. Guns that fired metal projectiles instead of energy beams. The sound was deafening. The effect was immediate. The creatures that had shrugged off energy fire now burst apart under the impact of solid ammunition. But there were so many of them. Rivi pressed herself against the wall and watched the battle. She had never seen violence like this. Solari avoided conflict. They negotiated. They fled. They did not stand in corridors and fight monsters with gunpowder and steel that a creature broke through the line and lunged toward a group of cowering civilians. Amy intercepted it. She was half its size, but she hit it with the full force of her body and drove a combat knife into what might have been its head. It collapsed on top of her. She pushed the body aside and kept fighting. "What?" Rivi shouted over the noise. "Why are you doing this?" Daniel fired 3 more shots before answering. "Because there are still people behind us." Simple words. No grand philosophy. No complex reasoning. Just the basic truth that there were living beings who needed protection, and the humans had chosen to provide it. The first wave of creatures fell back. Bodies covered the corridor floor. Some were pale-tide. Some were human. "Reloading," someone called. "Injuries?" "Peterson is down. Leg wound." "I am handling it." Amy was already applying pressure to a wounded Marine's leg. Daniel looked at the corridor ahead. More sounds were coming. More movement in the darkness. "That was just the first push," he said. "They were testing us." "Testing you." "The tide learns. It adapts. It will try something different next time." Rivi looked at the barricade, at the humans with their primitive weapons, at the frightened civilians huddled behind them. "This is hopeless," she whispered. Daniel reloaded his weapon and checked his remaining ammunition. When he looked at her again, there was no despair in his eyes. No surrender. Just determination. "Maybe," he said. "But hopeless and finished are not the same thing." He turned to face the corridor as the second wave began its approach. "Second positions," he ordered. "Make them pay for every step." Rivi realized she was not running. She had nowhere to run. The evacuation ships were on the other side of the station. The only path was through the tide. She was trapped with the humans. And strangely, that felt safer than being anywhere else. She picked up a fallen weapon from a dead Marine. She had never held one before. It was heavier than she expected. 3 hours into the siege, Rivi finally understood what made humans different. It was not their strength. The Draenari were stronger. It was not their speed. Several species could outrun them easily. It was not their technology. Human weapons were crude compared to galactic standards. Most advanced civilizations had moved past projectile weapons centuries ago. What made humans different was simpler and more terrifying. They refused to stop. Rivi watched from behind the barricade as Daniel led his team through the 5th wave of pale-tide attackers. They were tired. They were wounded. They had lost 3 of their original 12. And still they fought. Amy had taken a deep cut across her left arm during the 3rd wave. She had tied a piece of cloth around it with her teeth and kept shooting with her right hand. Peterson, the Marine with the leg wound, had dragged himself to a sitting position and was reloading magazines for the others. A man named Ross was fighting with blood running down his face from a head wound that should have put him on the ground. The Pale Tide did not understand this. They were a hive mind. They thought as one. When part of them was damaged, the whole collective felt it. Pain was shared. Fear was shared. The logical response to overwhelming damage was retreat and reassessment. But humans did not work that way. Each human was an individual. Each one made their own choice to stand or fall. And they kept choosing to stand. The 5th wave finally broke. The creatures pulled back into the darkness of the corridor, leaving more bodies behind. The humans did not cheer. They did not celebrate. They simply checked their weapons and prepared for the next assault. "Ammunition count," Daniel called out. The answers came back. Not good. They were running low on everything. Koss appeared at the barricade. The Draenari warrior was enormous, nearly 3 meters tall, with 6 powerful limbs and scales that could stop a blade. His species was known for their strength and pride. They looked down on humans as weak savages who had clawed their way to space through luck and brutality. Koss had been one of the loudest critics of humanity on the station. Now he carried the body of a fallen human Marine in his upper arms. "This one saved my younglings," Koss said. His voice was rough. The creatures broke through to the civilian shelter. "This human threw herself between them and my children." Daniel took the body gently. The Marine was a young woman named Torres. She had joined the team only 6 months ago. "She did her job," Daniel said quietly. "She was half my size, a fraction of my strength." Koss looked at his own massive hands. "I was fighting on the other side of the station. I could not reach them in time. She could have run. She should have run. We do not run from children in danger." Koss was silent for a long moment. Then he picked up a human weapon from the ground. Show me how to use this. Amy stepped forward and adjusted his grip. Hold here. Look through here. Squeeze the trigger. Do not pull. The recoil will push back. I know recoil. I have fired weapons before. Not like this one. Human weapons are louder and messier than what you are used to. Koss took a practice aim. Good. I want them to hear me coming. Rivi found herself standing next to Amy. The medic was checking her wounded arm, wincing slightly as she cleaned the cut. Does it hurt? Rivi asked. Yes. Amy said it simply, without complaint. Pain is just information. It tells you something is wrong. Useful data. How can you be so calm? We are going to die here. Amy looked up at her. For the first time, Rivi saw something beneath the professional exterior. Fear. Real fear. I am not calm, Amy said. I am terrified. But being scared does not mean I get to stop working. How? How do you fight when you are afraid? Amy finished bandaging her arm. Where I come from, we have a lot of predators. Big ones. Fast ones. The kind that can kill you before you even know they are there. We learned early that running does not always save you. Sometimes you have to stand your ground and make yourself look bigger than you are. And if that does not work, then you go down fighting and hope you hurt them enough that they think twice before attacking the next person. Rivi looked at the weapon in her own hands. She had not fired it yet. She did not know if she could. I am Solari, she said. We are prey. We evolved to flee. So did we originally. Amy smiled slightly. Humans were not always the top predators on our world. We were small, weak, easy targets. But somewhere along the way, we decided that running was not enough. We started fighting back. We made tools. We made weapons. We made each other. Made each other. Humans are strong because we work together. One human is not much, but a group of humans who trust each other. Amy gestured at the barricade, at the exhausted Marines still checking their weapons. We conquered our planet. We reached the stars. And we will hold this corridor until every last civilian is safe. Daniel called out from the front. Movement in Sector 3. They are coming again. Rivi tightened her grip on the weapon. Her hands were shaking. Amy noticed. She reached over and steadied Rivi's arms. Breathe, she said. Aim for center mass. Squeeze the trigger slowly. I do not know if I can do this. You can. Amy's voice was firm. I have seen prey animals fight before. When they have something worth protecting, they become the most dangerous creatures in the room. The sounds were coming again. Clicking. Scraping. The wet noise of the tide moving through corridors. Rivi raised her weapon. She was still shaking, but she did not run. Rivi pulled the trigger and missed. The creature was right in front of her, a mass of twisted limbs and hungry mouths, and she missed. The shot went wide and hit the wall behind it. Amy was there before Rivi could panic. The medic fired twice into the creature's center, and it collapsed. Adjust right, Amy said. You are pulling left when you shoot. Rivi nodded and aimed again. Another creature came through the smoke. She remembered to breathe. She adjusted her aim. She squeezed the trigger. This time she did not miss. The creature fell. Rivi stared at it for a moment, not quite believing what she had done. Then another one appeared and she fired again. Something was changing inside her. She could feel it. All her life, she had been taught that violence was wrong, that fighting was primitive, that civilized beings used words instead of weapons. But words did not stop the pale tide. Diplomacy did not save the civilians hiding behind the barricade. Only the humans did that. Only the ones willing to bleed for strangers. The sixth wave retreated. Rivi lowered her weapon and realized her arms were shaking from exhaustion instead of fear. You are getting better, Amy said. I killed something. You defended someone. There is a difference. Counselor Haroon appeared from behind a barrier. He had been hiding there since the second wave, doing nothing. His feathers were matted with sweat, and his eyes darted around constantly. We must negotiate, he said. I am a senior diplomat. If I can speak with their leader, perhaps I can arrange terms. Daniel did not even look at him. The tide does not negotiate. It consumes. Every species can be reasoned with. Every conflict can be resolved through dialogue. Tell that to the 47 civilizations they erased from existence. Haroon stepped closer, his voice rising. You are soldiers. You do not understand politics. There are always options beyond violence. There are. Daniel finally turned to face him. Surrender. They will absorb you into the collective. You will become part of them. Your thoughts, your memories, everything you are will dissolve into their mass. Is that the option you want? Haroon had no answer. Rivi stepped between them. Counselor, the humans are trying to save us. Perhaps now is not the time to question their methods. Haroon looked at her with surprise and anger. You forget your place, junior diplomat. I am your elder. Your superior. My superior ran and hid while these humans died protecting us. Rivi felt the words coming before she could stop them. You demanded their shuttle for yourself. You pushed wounded people aside to reach the evacuation ships first. You have offered nothing but criticism while they sacrifice everything. The barricade fell silent. Even the humans stopped what they were doing to watch. Haroon's feathers rose in outrage. You dare speak to me this way? Yes. Rivi was surprised at how steady her voice sounded. I dare. For a moment, she thought Haroon would strike her. His claws flexed. His beak opened to shout. Then a new sound filled the air. Not the clicking of the tide. Something electronic. A communication signal. Daniel grabbed his radio. This is Webb. Identify. A human voice crackled through the static. Sergeant Webb, this is the Resolute. Human battle cruiser. We received your distress call. We are engaging the Pale Tide fleet now. The room erupted in relief. People who had been preparing to die were suddenly laughing and crying. How long until you can extract us? Daniel asked. 30 minutes. We are pushing through their outer vessels, but they are thick out here. Can you hold? Daniel looked at his remaining team. 8 Marines left from the original 12. Most of them wounded. Ammunition nearly gone. We can hold, he said. Good luck, Sergeant. Resolute out. 30 minutes. Rivi looked at the corridor ahead. The tide was still out there. They had pulled back, but they were not gone. They were waiting, watching, learning, and they would know that rescue was coming. They would feel the Resolute's attack on their fleet. They would understand that their time was limited. They are going to hit us hard, Amy said quietly. Everything they have. Daniel nodded. Final push. They will try to overwhelm us before the shuttles arrive. Koss checked his weapon. The Drenari warrior had become a valuable part of the defense. His size and strength covered gaps that the smaller humans could not. Then we give them everything we have, Koss said. Daniel looked around at the survivors. Humans, aliens, diplomats, warriors, all of them standing together behind the same barricade. Listen up, he said. Rescue is coming, but they need us to hold for 30 more minutes. That means 30 more minutes of fighting, 30 more minutes of bleeding. Some of us will not make it. He paused. Nobody spoke. But if we fall forward. We die facing the enemy, not running from it. And every second we hold is another second for the civilians to reach the evacuation bay. Rivi gripped her weapon tighter. Her hands had stopped shaking. I am with you, she said. Amy smiled. You sound almost human. Is that a compliment? From me? Yes. The sound started again in the corridor, louder than before. More of them. The tide was gathering for one final assault. Daniel raised his weapon. Here they come. 20 minutes left, and the evacuation bay was overrun. The news came through the radio in fragments. Pale Tide forces had broken through a secondary corridor. They were flooding into the transport area. Civilians who had almost reached safety were now trapped between the creatures and the sealed blast doors. The shuttles from the Resolute could not land until the bay was cleared. Daniel did not hesitate. We move now. Everyone who can fight, follow me. That is insane, Haroon said. We should stay here. Defend this position. The position means nothing if the civilians die. Daniel was already moving. Stay here if you want. Rivi followed without thinking. So did Amy, Koss, and the remaining Marines. Even some of the alien delegates who had picked up fallen weapons joined the group. Haroon stood alone behind the barricade. The corridors were dark. Emergency lighting cast red shadows on the walls. Bodies lay everywhere. Some were tide creatures. Some were not. Rivi tried not to look at them. They moved fast and quiet. The humans had a way of communicating without words. Hand signals, glances, subtle shifts in position. They flowed around obstacles and through doorways like water. Contact, someone whispered that a group of tide creatures was ahead, moving toward the evacuation bay. They had not noticed the approaching team. Quiet takedown, Daniel ordered. Blades only. Rivi did not have a blade. She watched as the humans moved forward in complete silence. They struck from behind, driving knives into the weak points of the creatures before they could make a sound. In seconds, the group was dead. Clear. Move. They reached the evacuation bay from a maintenance entrance. The main doors were blocked by creatures, but the smaller service tunnel was empty. Daniel sent a scout through first. Bay is flooded, the scout reported. Dozens have tied. Civilians are cornered near the shuttle pad. Maybe 50 people. Can we flank them? Negative. They are everywhere. Daniel thought for a moment. Then he turned to the group. Frontal assault. We hit them hard and fast. Create a corridor for the civilians to reach the blast door controls. If we can seal the doors behind us, the shuttles can land. We will be surrounded, Amy said. Yes. Nobody argued. Nobody hesitated. Daniel asked for volunteers to take point. Every human stepped forward. So did Koss. And so did Rivi. Daniel looked at her. You should stay back. Provide cover. I am done staying back. Rivi met his eyes. I spent my whole life watching others take risks for me. I want to be the one taking the risk. For a moment, Daniel studied her. Then he nodded. Stay close. Move when I move. They burst through the maintenance door like a wave. The tide creatures reacted instantly, turning toward the new threat. But the humans were faster. They fired and moved, cutting a path through the mass of bodies. Rivi ran beside Daniel. She shot at anything that came close. She did not think about what she was doing. She just acted. The civilians saw them coming. Some started running toward the blast door controls on the far side of the bay. Others were frozen in fear. Move, Koss roared. His voice was loud enough to shake the walls. Get to the doors. The civilians ran out. A tide creature lunged at Rivi from the side. She did not have time to aim. She just pulled the trigger and hoped. The shot went wide. The creature kept coming. Daniel stepped in front of her. The creature's tendril punched through his shoulder. He grunted in pain, but did not fall. Instead, he shoved his weapon against the creature's body and fired repeatedly until it collapsed. Daniel. Rivi grabbed his arm. Keep moving. Blood was running down his side. The doors. They reached the control panel. A young human marine was already there, trying to work the interface. It is locked, he said. Security override. Break it. I am trying. The tide was closing in around them. The corridor they had created was collapsing. Soon they would be completely surrounded. Amy appeared at Daniel's side. She looked at his wound and her face went pale. That is bad. I know. You need a tourniquet. You need surgery. Later, the control panel beeped. The blast doors began to close. Shuttles inbound, someone shouted. 90 seconds. Civilians were pushing through the narrowing gap in the doors. Some were crying. Some were carrying children. Counselor Haroon appeared in the crowd, shoving his way to the front. Rivi stepped into his path. Wounded first, she said. I am a council member. I have priority. Koss reached down with one massive arm and lifted Haroon off the ground. The small bird said wounded first. His voice left no room for argument. You do not look wounded to me. Haroon sputtered in outrage but stopped trying to push forward. The shuttles landed. Civilians boarded in panicked waves. The Marines formed a perimeter around the ramp, holding back the tide with the last of their ammunition. Everyone through, Daniel ordered. Move. The team fell back toward the shuttles. One by one, they boarded. Koss carried 2 wounded Marines under his arms. Amy was dragging a civilian who had collapsed from shock. Rivi was almost to the ramp when she looked back. Daniel was not following. He was standing at the blast door controls, his hand on a manual override lever. The doors will not hold, he said. Someone has to stay. Rivi stopped. Get on the shuttle, Daniel said. She did not move. That is an order. I am not one of your soldiers. Rivi walked back toward him. You cannot order me. Daniel's face was pale from blood loss. His hands were shaking, but his eyes were steady. If you stay, you die. Maybe. Rivi picked up a fallen weapon. Maybe not. She stood beside him and faced the corridor. The blast doors buckled. The tide was almost through. You are crazy, Daniel said. I learned from the best. The blast doors failed. Rivi fired into the wave of creatures that poured through the gap. Beside her, Daniel did the same. Despite the blood soaking his uniform and the tremor in his hands, they were going to die. Rivi knew it. The shuttle was lifting off behind them. The tide was endless before them. There was no escape, and yet she felt something strange. Not peace exactly. Not acceptance. Something fiercer. Pride. She was standing. After a lifetime of running, hiding, negotiating, she was finally standing for something. Out of ammo, Daniel said. He threw his empty weapon aside and pulled a knife. Rivi kept firing until her gun clicked empty too. She looked at the blade Daniel had given her earlier, still strapped to her belt. She had never used one. "I do not know how to fight with a knife," she admitted. Pointy end goes into the enemy. Despite everything, Rivi laughed. The first creature reached them. Daniel met it with his blade, driving the point through its central mass. Rivi ducked under a grasping tendril and slashed at whatever she could reach. They were surrounded. The shuttle was gone. The bay was filled with monsters. Then the ceiling exploded. Rivi threw herself to the ground as fire rained down from above. The tide creatures screamed, their bodies igniting in the intense heat. Through the smoke and flames, she saw something descending through the broken ceiling. Humans, in heavy armor, falling from the sky on jets of flame. The rescue team from the Resolute landed in the middle of the chaos. Their weapons were different from what she had seen before. Larger, more powerful. They cut through the tide like a storm through dry leaves. Someone grabbed Rivi and threw her over their shoulder. Target secured. Moving to extraction. "Wait," she shouted. "Daniel, we have him. Move." They were carried through fire and bodies, through the ruined bay and into a secondary airlock. A small transport craft waited there. Rivi was set down on a bench. Daniel was placed on a stretcher beside her. He was pale. Too pale. But he was breathing. "Is he going to live?" Rivi asked. "He is human," one of the armored soldiers replied. "He will be fine." The transport lifted off. Through the small window, Rivi watched Horizon 7 shrink behind them. Parts of the station were burning. Other sections had been torn open and exposed to space. And beyond the station, she saw the battle. The Resolute was a massive ship surrounded by smaller escort vessels. They were fighting the Pale Tide fleet with weapons Rivi did not recognize. Beams of light cut through organic vessels. Missiles exploded against living hulls. The humans were not just holding the line. They were pushing forward. "They are retreating," the pilot said. "The tide is pulling back." Rivi could not believe it. The Pale Tide had never retreated. They had never been stopped. For 3 centuries, they had consumed everything in their path. Until now. 2 days later, Rivi sat in the medical bay of the Resolute. Daniel was awake, propped up on pillows, his shoulder wrapped in bandages. The doctors said he would recover fully. Humans healed fast. "You saved my life," Rivi said. "You stayed when you could have run." Daniel smiled slightly. "I think that makes us even. I have been thinking about what happened, about why I stayed." And Rivi looked at her hands. The same hands that had never held a weapon before that day. The same hands that had fired and fought and refused to let go. "Before that day, I thought I understood terror," she said. "I am Solari. We are prey. We evolved to be afraid. We know what it means to be hunted, to flee, to hide in the dark and hope the predator passes us by." Daniel listened in silence. "But true terror? True terror found me when I chose to stand with humanity." She met his eyes. "Not because you are monsters, not because you dragged me into violence, but because I discovered what I was capable of when I stopped running." "That sounds like courage to me." "Maybe." Rivi shook her head. "But it also terrified me. Finding people worth dying beside. Choosing to live with them instead. That changes you. It changes everything you thought you knew about yourself." The door opened. Amy entered, followed by Koss. They had both survived the battle. Koss had minor wounds that his thick scales had mostly absorbed. Amy had new bandages on her arm, but seemed otherwise fine. "Council session in 1 hour," Amy said. "They want to discuss the Pale Tide response." "They want to discuss it now?" Rivi was surprised. 2 days ago, they were dismissing the threat. 2 days ago, they had not watched humans punch a hole through an enemy that had never been stopped. Koss crossed his arms. "Things change when you prove the impossible is possible." Daniel sat up slowly. "Help me to the conference room." "You should rest," Amy said. "I will rest when the galaxy is safe." They helped him into a chair with wheels. Rivi pushed it through the corridors of the Resolute, past human crew members who nodded in respect as they passed. The conference room was filled with alien delegates. Counselor Haroon was there, looking smaller than Rivi remembered. Other senior diplomats had arrived from nearby systems. "This emergency session of the Galactic Council is now in order," a presiding member announced. "We are here to discuss the Pale Tide threat and our collective response." The debate was short. For once, nobody argued about politics or territory or ancient grudges. The threat was too real. The evidence was too clear. "We move to authorize a unified military response," the presiding member said. "All in favor?" Every hand rose. Every voice agreed. The motion passes. We require a command structure. Given their demonstrated capability and experience, we propose that humanity lead the defensive effort. Daniel looked at Rivi. His arm was in a sling. His face was tired, but his eyes were bright. Told you they would come around eventually, he said. Rivi smiled. You humans have a talent for making the impossible feel inevitable. The session continued. Plans were made. Alliances were formed. The galaxy was preparing for war, and Rivi sat beside the humans who had taught her what it meant to stand. She was Solari. Her people did not fight. Her people did not stand, but she had stood, and she would stand again, because true terror had found her. And she had survived it, not by running, not by hiding, but by choosing to face it beside the strangest, most stubborn, most impossibly brave species she had ever known. Humanity had shown her the way. Now it was her turn to walk it.